Well, yeah, well, that's what but he said in case of fire. I was going to pick up two of the things I mentioned last time we taped, in a slightly expanded way. To remind you first, the example I was using is a microcosm for life, like an arraignment hearing in a criminal court, wherein we have a living, superb example of civilization within the confines of four walls, several hundred people in there, conflicting, various interests, large groups of defendants, large numbers of attorneys, the state, the prosecutors, the bailiff, the judge, maybe even a public defender or two around, the defendants who do not have attorneys wondering whether they should ask for one. All of this, it's just one example, but you remember I was using that. And I drew your attention in some detail to the fact that you should know already, but here's an example amongst others I could have pulled out that we have people facing matters of grave consequence. The defendants, of course, facing jail time, fines. The judge may, the attorney is having to represent clients, and assuming if they're taking their job in a professional, sincere manner, is concerned in a professional sense as their clients are, understanding what the potential penalties that his or her client faces, the work that they put into it, the billing that they've are running up, the bill they've already presented, where they will get paid, and etc. The judge, perhaps up for re-election, has some concern in his mind, you would think, about the attorneys in front of him, whether the bar will raise some combined objection to his re-election. The young associates from the solicitor at the DA's office, their first job out of law school, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to keep their job. All of this going on. And if you could stand there aside or above it and look down as an impartial observer, if you could keep from being caught up into the ordinary flow of consciousness and you looked, you would be into the thing that I spent almost last time representing again for you, that you look around and there are all of these people with a matter serious indeed, and within the confines, again, picture these four walls, and there are several hundred people, but with all the various conflicting interests they have, and yet it is within the judicial system, and overall it's supposed to be like running in large slabs of meat, I guess, in the front door and then going out the back door after the judge calls the next case. It's supposed to be sausages of some kind. In other words, justice of some matter, there's an output. We call it justice. I don't mean in the sense that the people agree that they've been served a dish of justice, but the case, there's been a disposition of what took place. So in one door, and then it's going out. But there within the four walls, it's like this great churning mix that, again, is a superb microcosm for civilization itself. And you look around to all these people with these great personal, solemn, severe interests, and you look around, and they are by and large operating in an almost somnambulistic state. That it is the flashes of gunfire that I poetically put to you several weeks ago about in one city, in the skies above one city, we're seeing the periodic flashes of gunfire, first here, then there. And you look around, out of these, let's say, 200 people in there, and at any given moment, if you do a snapshot and you look around, in severe cases, which is not all that unusual, from a still photograph, you can look and see the judge. You can see 3/4 of the attorneys, 2/3 of the defendants. Even in a still snapshot, you can see them absolutely in a state of wide-eyed unconsciousness, by almost any definition, not by anything mystical or transcendental or extreme. It is simply a state with which all men are familiar if they can hear this at all, if they can hear any notation of what life's about, that there they are in the snapshot, daydreaming. That's what it normally passes as. And then they will bounce back, just back and forth, and maybe some apparent external stimuli produces it, such as the name is called of the defendant, and he's like this, and he goes, oh. His attorney may also go, oh, that's me. The bailiff, the court reporter could have dozed off there for a second, ruminating, waxing, waning, staring, and suddenly she hears the case call, and she, gets out of her thing, begins to stenographize, or gets prepared to. And yet, it is a continuing process of the just like spasmodic burst of gunfire. Here in this, let's look upon the courtroom as being a living organism. And here it is, just parts of it. To the ordinary degree of consciousness, not to any extreme degree, but to the ordinary degree of consciousness that you would be giving your full attention to something. By ordinary definition, such as if you were in class, or you would think perhaps in this case that if you were a defendant there, that you would be giving it your full attention, but if that sounds too extreme and you've had no experience, how about you're back in school? And it's the final exam, or the day before final exam. The professor's going back through, doing a recount, giving you some hints of the kinds of questions. He may give little winks, and you know that he's going to give you a good indication of what's on the test tomorrow. The whole quarter is at stake. And we'll assume that you are a sincere student. Then you know what I'm talking about. You'd probably load up on coffee, but at least when you're in there, you try and give it your full attention. You realize I should not daydream, because I can drift off. You just know how things are. And he could say, by the way, it's very important that you remember so-and-so, and that could be the very question. So you know what it is to make yourself be attentive, just at the ordinary level. And you can look there at this scene and realize that at any given time, the majority of the people in there to do my snapshot and to freeze reality, they are not even at that level. They are simply staring out the window. Even if the place has no windows. It's the... It is a large part, shall we say, why don't we, of the state of consciousness of ordinary man. And as usual, I point out to you that it doesn't make any difference. Things still go on, but now I want to expand upon that a bit. There's an energy running that courtroom. Let's continue to use that for a second as an excellent example of the life of man collectively. There is an energy running that courtroom and everything in it. And the energy is not, at the first order, men. Men are the outputs of it. They are the outlets of the energy, but it's not a theory. It's not some poetic notion of Shakespeare or some of the Greek dramatists that we're actors and someone has written this play and we find ourselves here. Or it's not the Southern Baptists believing, well, God's predestined some people to do things and we're helpless. It's not any of that theoretical, philosophical, theological speculation. If you look, you realize at any given moment in that courtroom, the majority of the people, as far as consciously, physically they're here, they could probably defend themselves, their food's digesting. We'll assume that all 200 people in there are physically, genetically sound and normal. Physically they're there, nobody's passed out, everybody's doing the kinds of things the body does, they're fidgeting or else they're just, the body is there. But at any given second, at any moment, as far as consciousness, you cannot say that those people are conscious up to the level that you would be trying to drive your car in heavy traffic or listening to the refresher day of the final exam. They are not even that conscious at any particular moment. And they keep bouncing back and then they fall away. And so if you look, it's no longer any theory of determinism or fatalism. You simply look and you realize that to think that human consciousness is running this scene is a fallacy. You don't have to think about it. Once you look at it that way, you look, and there are not enough people just pay attention to what's going on to make the thing run. If for that courtroom to get through, for them to bang the gavel at 9 and get through the cases and whatever goes on, when at 5 o'clock, if you say human consciousness ran what went on, for you to look at it the way I'm describing, just to see it, you realize that is not true. That is not what's running that. It's a simple fact. There's another energy running it. The tricky part with people trying to do such as this is the energy running that courtroom is the same energy running the consciousness of the people in the courtroom. It's the same energy. Now, at the ordinary level of consciousness, if we stepped into that courtroom, into the scene, and we'll assume that all the 200 people there are everyday midstream of humanity people. That is just ordinary, genetically sound, up here, people. And if you told them that there was an energy running the courtroom there, and even if they'd put up for that for a second, or if you said there's an energy running life, and you said, well, let's don't argue the word, and let's don't start talking about God or anything, you just said there's an energy running life, and they say, okay. And you said the energy running everything out there is the same energy, the same thing, right? Didn't give a moment, that's running your consciousness, that's running you in here. Then anyone who would listen to that for a second would strongly disagree. And I could make them hear it in a more simplistic way by just simply saying, but I wanted you to consider it that way first by telling them that there is no difference in what's out there and what's in here. Now that's an old story. Just if I left it at that term, anyone who's read much of philosophy or just anything, even crude philosophy, that idea has been around. There's always been someone saying, well, normally they will bring it down to the level of saying, well, there is actually no out there to speak of, it's our perception. It's no theory. Now this, you can't necessarily see it just from my description, just by me saying it. Now what I've described up until now of realizing that to give credit to the individuals there in the courtroom, to give them credit that they have consciously, for those 8 hours, have run that piece of machinery, whatever it did, something got through the judge, and everybody looked around, they got through the calendar, they went bam, and everybody looked satisfied. Those are still there. Those are not going to be satisfied. They've already taken them off to the jail anyway. But the point is, the intended purpose of the day got completed more or less. But once you just look at it, the way I'm describing, to give the humans involved, to give them credit for consciously running that thing is impossible. You cannot do it if you can drag yourself out of that same kind of quandary, that same kind of conscious fix. Instead of just perking up now and then and just a little flash, if you can hold it for several seconds at least, while taking into consideration my description of what you're trying to see, and you look around. At that moment, you're the only person in a sense that's conscious in that courtroom. Now, the judge, people here and there can be more conscious at that 1 second than they were just before. But if you can stop all of the inside chatter, if you can be conscious without comment, somewhere on the road to enlightenment, somewhere at least getting on the path, if you can hold that non-involved conscious awareness for 4 or 5 seconds, let's say, and you look around, then what I've said last time and tonight, there's no question. You don't even have to think about it. You simply look around and you realize even those that look the most alert, that during the 4 or 5 seconds you can do this, let's say, you look up and the judge has just gotten involved with a intense discussion with one of the attorneys about some motion he's made or something, and you see them, they're very wide-eyed and very alert, and they're talking to you, oh yeah. And so they are more conscious than somebody doing this. But you look up, if you're in a state wherein you're not involved, and you look at them, you realize that they're still not as conscious as you are. That's not the way you think about it, because when you can do that, as many of you know, you're not sitting there in judgment thinking, boy, I'm conscious and they're not. It doesn't even enter into it. But the point is, you see that those that apparently are alert, the judge and this one attorney leaning across the bench saying, blah, 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 they're more alert than half the courtroom that you look around, and half the courtroom's in that momentary, reoccurring state of. And in a sense, they're more conscious than that, except you realize they're not conscious. They're not running that. And you just either see it or you don't. And you cannot see it while you're in that same condition. And that's why I'm bringing it up now to point out to you that the energy running that courtroom is the same energy running the consciousness of the people therein. That is what makes it impossible to ever see it under any ordinary conditions. No matter whether you're a judge with much experience, whether you're a man sitting there on the bench with 2 or 3 postgraduate degrees in law and psychology, or whether you're a defendant out there, an indigent, semi-literate person, you will never see what's going on as long as you're in the position I'm describing And that is that the energy running that courtroom, not people, not the conscious energy of man, but the energy running that courtroom and making that thing work, which is simply, remember I'm using as one example as life, but what appears to be outside, that there you sit within the courtroom, and it's representing all the world out there for this moment. The energy making that thing run, the energy running that is the same energy running through your consciousness and running it. So do you understand, at that level, no matter how, that you can try to be alert and go, yes, yes. But if that's all it is, it's the same energy, and yet consciousness says, no, there is a great gap. If it understood this in the most basic way that I'm putting it rhetorically, it'd say, wait a minute, you're almost saying that there's no difference between in here and out there, and that's not true. Because consciousness is like accusing consciousness of having no freedom of will. And it goes, and just based on the fact that it can consider your question as like prima facie evidence or proof even, that that's not true. Because I can consider it. And if someone said, are you insinuating that there's really no difference between out there and in here? And I said, well, okay, if that's the way you want to put it. They go, aha, that's not true. Because consciousness feels itself in here. And if you said there is no difference in what's running this and what's running everything out there, and a sincere man goes, and he's pondering it in here, not out there. He alone's pondering it, and so the answer is obvious. You're wrong. You cannot prove it. Because the energy running things out there in the courtroom is the same energy running the consciousness of the people therein. And so to tell them, hey, what's going on here has got nothing to do with you. You're not doing it. You can't see it. And the same thing, there is something running it, of course, because something seems to be taking place. The machinery of justice, what takes place within this environment, or if you can expand it, the planet. What takes place in humanity, what's moving out there, what seems to be taking place, humans are not doing it, something else is doing it. It's another energy, and that energy is the same thing that's running each individual's consciousness and them taking it personally. And the man goes, well, let me think. They go, no, that can't be. And he's right. That is, he cannot see it when he says it can't be, because he can say, all right. And he tries his best, and you can't go anywhere with it. Now let me move back to another one that I used recently about the Oldies Act, to refresh your memory. Here in America, they're known as Oldies, O-L-D-I-E-S. Oldies, it's like groups that, since the rock era, since 1955 or so, they're Oldies Acts. It's acts that at one time were popular for one or more hits and had such a reputation that a few people evidently will still pay to see them, but they hadn't had a hit in 20 or 30 years. And I used several examples. Well, the Temptations, let me try to bring it up to date. A huge hit, I assume in most of you people's lifetime, 5 guys, they were a monster act when they were hot. Last I heard, 4 of them are dead and the other one's in a hospital. So there are no Temptations, and yet they continue appear. They in fact still record, but anyway, they appear. The Temptations. And if you were hip at all and kept up, you know that that's not the Temptations. They're all dead, or at least you know none of them are there. I mean, it's all 25-year-old guys. And they were your favorite act when you were growing up, and you're 45. And you look up and they're 25. And you know it's not. It's just no secret. It is no secret is the point. It is not the Temptations, but people will show up to see it. And you remember the scene I made up a few months ago when I was using this. So let's say instead of, opposed to that, let's say, who would somebody know? Rick Derringer or Edgar Winter? A single act. Edgar Winter. People's heard of him, haven't you? He was a hit along about the same time, had a few hits. Edgar Winter is pulling into this small town. He's an oldies act now. Probably carrying around, anyway, it's his name. And he's driving to his club for one night. He knows where it is, it's down the beach here, and he passes a club just before he gets there. It says, appearing tonight only, The Temptations, live in person. Showtime, 10 o'clock. Right down the road is where he's going. He knows he'll see his name. Appearing tonight only, Edgar Winter. Showtime, 10 o'clock. And he drives fast, and there's 5 guys who no longer exist, and they will still, let's assume, it's probably a safe bet that they will draw as many or more people there tonight, the Temptations, than Edgar Winter will down the street. Now remember, none of them there's no Temptations. And he muses to himself as he drives by. That's the hell of being a single zodiac, because you got to personally show up. I know every time I do that, several people, it looks like their head kind of gets in a monkey grip and invisible, and like, I know it all. Sometimes I can tell it hits some of you for a while, and it doesn't, because at first, well, to some of you it makes no sense the first time you hear it, and then to some of you think it makes sense, and you'll kind of squeal, and then you think, well, yeah, it kind of makes sense, but that makes no sense at all. I'm not going into it much more about on that level, except it is a fact. Think about it. I'll give you one more second. If it's 5 guys, and it's not the real Temptations, it doesn't matter. People will still show up. But if it's 1 guy, and it's not the real Edgar Winter, and they show up down the street, and they walk in, and there's a guy, that's 25 years old, short and fat, got black curly hair. Anybody knows anything about Edgar Winter, they know that ain't Edgar Winter, and they are not going to put up with it. But they walk in the door, even if they didn't know the Temptations. If it's somebody used to like the Temptations and don't go out to a club much, and let's say it's down at a resort, the guy and his wife, they hadn't been out in years, they said, let's go see the Temptations. You remember we used to, when we were in college, hear them say, my girl, dude, and they go, yeah. So they go in, they pay their money, they say, this is real Temptation. The guy at the door says, yeah, and this is $5. And he thinks, what a bargain. And he goes in, he looks at them, they come on stage, and they start singing, it sounds right, and he looks up, and he says, honey, he says, something's happened. You and I are 45 years old, and look at those guys, they're teenagers. And maybe they finally go over to the doorman or the bartender and say, that's not the real Temptation. The guy said, well, no, all the Temptations, most of them are dead as far as I know, but they're an oldies act. They've got the same arrangements and stuff, and they got the down the dance stuff. So the guy goes, well, okay, and he'll put up with it. Even if he didn't know before he got there, chances are he'll put up with it if they sound anything like it. But if you walk in and you don't see a tall, thin albino with long white hair that's about 50 years old, and they claim that's Edgar Winter, and it's the other guy, nobody's going to go for it. So Edgar thought that, driving by, like, well, that's the hell. In other words, they died. It's almost like he's saying, they're lucky, they're dead and don't have to show up. But anyway, the main thing is it's 5. Because the way he put it, if you remember my original version of this, was to himself, he thinks, well, that's the hell of being a single zodiac, is you actually got to show up. Now, for those of you who thought that nothing could be made of that when I made up the tale first time several months ago, watch this. We're going even further with it. Wait a minute, you don't mean it's even connected to the courtroom? Uh-huh. Get ready. The Temptations, a 5-man act, they don't have to show up in person. A singles act has got to show up. The courtroom. Now let's put it all in my special blender. It is the difference between this energy that runs everything that is automatic and diffused, which is the Temptations, because as long as it's diffused, as long as they're in that courtroom, if you want to look at the courtroom now as being, I gave you a choice, a macrocosm of life or a macrocosm of one man's brain. The Temptations are diffused consciousness. It's 5 guys. Now I said that none of them left on stage. But what if 1 was left? What if 2 were left? That's still not the Temptations. Even 4 was left. But the point is, all 5 of them are no longer extant, are no longer part of it, and it doesn't matter. The Temptations continue. The name Temptations, the manager, whoever owns the label, it owns the rights to the name Temptations. 5 guys who no longer exist, their name is still making a living. That is diffused consciousness. That is the consciousness running that courtroom. The Temptations aren't there. The people aren't there consciously. The judge is not there. The attorneys are not there. That's the Temptations. But the Temptations will draw a crowd forever. You understand that? It's always been true. The Temptations were drawing 5,000 years ago. The Temptations they were already all dead. They were drawing crowds then. 5,000 years from now, they'll still be drawing crowds. Edgar Winter, It's got to be there in person. You look down at that courtroom, you look out at life, you're normal. That courtroom, let's go back to that. I want to connect them. That courtroom is the temptations. It is an oldies act. It is not pertinent. It is not alive. Contemporaneous consciousness. It's not even consciousness, but it's not even approaching contemporaneous, because what do people do when they daydream? I'll stick with that ordinary term. You know what I'm talking about by now, the night of the living dead, the zombie, but you look off like that, and it's never contemporaneous. You do not daydream contemporaneously. It's either past or present. The attorney is either there thinking about the last case he lost, it was almost similar to this, and the defendant's over there thinking, my God, this is the 5th time I've been arrested for this, what's going to happen? Maybe the stenographer looks off for a second, and she's wondering what time it is. You know, she's starving, she didn't have breakfast. In other words, she's thinking about coming up. She's thinking about the future, the immediate future. Everybody else that I just mentioned, they are reflecting upon the past. You do not daydream. You do not go into night of the living dead state of consciousness contemporaneously. I mean, we can try it. You just never thought about it. You want to try it right now? All right, let's everybody daydream, but make it contemporaneous. Make it instantly extant right now, and try it. Here we go. You blank out. You can't do it. Of course, it's almost a trick. I started one time to use it as a new metaphysical, mystical method, because just to try forces you momentarily to be blank. That is, it forces you out of that somnambulistic state of consciousness. But look at the courtroom. This is more than just a one-shot, perhaps titillating metaphor when I said the courtroom is the temptations. It is. That scene is the temptation. Do you understand, based upon last time and these first 20 minutes I spent tonight of me trying to describe what you can see for yourself. All kinds of collections, or when you get good, you can just walk out and look in the street. But let's go back to the courtroom so we can confine it for a second. That courtroom is not being run consciously by the people involved. Go back to my nightclub. The temptations are there in name, but that's not the temptations. What they're doing is not the temptations in action. And yet it works. The people showed up and paid. The guy, whoever now is coming out and being like the spokesman of the group, he says, and now here's the one we did that came right after. My girl was, what it was, honey pie, sugar pie, honey bunch. And he wasn't even alive then when it was a hit. But he says, and our next hit was, and you might be standing there and you know it's a lie. When he says, thank you, yeah. That was our biggest hit. That wasn't his biggest hit. But right after that, da-da-dum, came, and they break into the next song. And you can say, well, it's a lie. It doesn't matter. If you were standing, you go, well, how did they put up with this? People are applauding and punching each other like, yeah, wasn't that? I remember when that was out. People are dancing, and you think the whole thing is a sham. But as long as it's diffused, as long as it's the temptations, it'll work. But go down the street where they got the sham, the faux Edgar Winter, the place is empty. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised that the employees are kind of ticked off like, well, they tried to pull on us. No one will be there. Or if they trick people and get them in and assure them he's there, and they get them in, they paid their money, and then this short 25-year-old plump guy with curly black hair walks out, you're going to have riot on your hands. It's not going to work. You understand? Nobody's even going to pretend. I mean, if somebody hollers, you're not Edgar Winter. And the guy says, wait a minute. Now, all you knew, you're supposed to know, Edgar died 3 months ago in a car wreck. But I used to play in his band. I got the same arrangements. My voice is not bad. I can play sax. I can play guitar a little bit. I can play bass. Give me a chance. They're not going to give him a chance. If you're a single zodiac, you've got to show up. Back to the courtroom. And life. If you're going to be conscious, that's a singles act. And you've got to hell show up. I was going to say you've got to fuck to show up, but you've got to show up. You cannot drive by. You can't coast by. You cannot run off reputation. Because a man being conscious has no reputation. You can't run off your previous hits. There are no previous hits for being conscious. Being conscious in the past, and you go, well, wait a minute. Sure, sure I hadn't had a hit in 20 years, but think about the string of hits I did have. That will not fly in Buddha land. You can't try and reach a state of enlightenment and say, wait a minute, I know I'm kind of shaky today and I'm not really I'm not really on my best game, but think how many times I've been close to being conscious. Buddha wants his money back. When you are a singles act, you have got to show up. It is a fair description. Metaphor. That, the temptations, and the courtroom, the scene that I laid out the basics for you to consider this in. If you look at ordinary consciousness, not just out in other people, but in you, but it seems easier to look at life itself, because I do want you to understand that what's driving an individual's consciousness is the exact same energy that's driving everything out there. And I said at first, as I have several times, that until you understand that life itself is alive, nothing makes any sense at all. I mean, that's the first thing. But this is like just the subsection of that. It's like the next stage is then you understand, all right, life's alive, and the energy is driving what seems to be life, because everyone feels themselves separate from life. That's one of the jobs, that is one of the ways in which consciousness is able to work. If consciousness in an individual did not make you feel as though you were in some way removed from out there, we would not be where we are now. Men would not be men. Consciousness would not have manifested itself in any discernible way. We would not have tried to manipulate the environment. We would not have invented the wheel. We would not try to carry fire around. We wouldn't have done any of the things that denotes man above the animal level that you could observe. So the feeling that you are removed from the environment and other people at the basic level, at the automatic level, is the operational aspect of consciousness. That is, you've got to feel like, well, me and the environment are not the same thing. I'm obviously tied to it. When it rains, I get wet. Yeah. But the environment is not me. If people believe that, as I said, they would not have tried. We would have no technology. We would still be living in caves and etc. That should be easy enough to see. But also, there would not be anything in the abstract realm. There would be no art. There would be no politics. And I'm not talking about the physical aspect. In other words, men would not discuss anything. If we had been conscious and it did not bring on the feeling that there is a separateness between me and out there, speech would have never arose. Because talking to yourself is not good enough. Men have to discuss things. Speech has to be communication. It is not an internal, speech is not the same kind of internal operation that breathing is, or the circulation of blood. So you've got to feel that other people are separate from me, whether I like them or not, whether I agree with them or not, or else you would not talk about things. There would have been no discussion. Thus again, you can look at two ways. We would not have progressed technologically. We would still be living in a physically barbaric state. But also a parallel course, we would have not have developed in any of the manifestations of civilization without speech. And you would not have had speech. You would not, one man talk to another, did he not feel separate from him? You know, there's got to be this consciousness at that level that you and I are not the same person. You know physically you're not. Animals know that. They know to push one out of the way away from food, or to push a rival out of the way for females. They physically know that this other one is not them, but it is much deeper in the mind of man that there is a consciousness of a separation that is not just physical. That you walk up to people and you may even look at somebody's dress and think, if you're at a party about to discuss politics and you start to say something, you might turn around, there's a guy with a ponytail, and most of the people are in business suits you're sitting there talking to, and there's a guy in a ponytail and a t-shirt, and if you're about to espouse some great conservative view, let's say, you would probably immediately look at him and you realize there's no need to drag him over here unless you want an argument. Or if you did want an argument, you might say, well, wait a minute, let's ask this guy. You understand? Is that you have it's just automatic, but you have a consciousness that you and this other person could enter into great heated discussion. You understand that not only physically, but you can just look at this guy. And it's not just looks. Hormonally, many times you can tell. Women are better at it than men, but hormonally, men do it too. That you just know that you and this other person, that if you start discussing things in general, politics, economics, you just know this other person and I would not get along whatsoever. You just feel it. So there has to be this feeling of separateness. That gives a kind of myopia, or it's really just blindness to the fact that people will ever see at that level that what runs life out there runs their consciousness. Because, again, should I try to point that out to an ordinary person? Back to my courtroom scene. If I even got them to understand that we're hard-pressed to say that everybody in there is conscious. They're alert to what's going on, and they're all participating. They're doing their part. They're adding something to it. That it's 200 people in that courtroom, looking like, yes. Bailiff walks in, they watch him. He says, order in the court. Here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. Here comes pig meat. Well, here comes the judge. Here comes the judge out, and everybody stands. You stand, you look, and you notice, did anybody not stand? You're really attentive, and then you wonder, well, that's all the attorneys, I bet, sitting there in the front row, and you look down at that, and it is simply not going on. The majority of the people at any given moment are daydreaming. They're less than ordinarily, everyday conscious. And then if I told a person, if I said, there's some kind of energy running that, and they let it go, and they say, okay, there is something else going on. I don't know what, but you're right. We can't say that everybody in there is contributing, and if it takes 200 people to make that thing work, then something is wrong, because the 200 people at any given moment are not actually consciously even there. So if you call it some other energy, I'll go along with that, says the other person. Now I say, okay, let's take it a step further. The energy, whatever it is, that's running that courtroom, that's making that whole thing for 8 hours, and something seems to get done. Cases get disposed of, papers get stamped, they get filed away, people leave, and they don't have to come back. Something happens. But the energy running that is not the people. You agreed to that, and the guy says, okay, I'll go along with that. Now I said, the energy running that is the same exact energy that's running each person their consciousness. He then says no. He has to. Because that would separate, that would blur, it would eradicate, if he took me literally, it would eradicate the feeling that all the individuals there, including this ordinary man I'm talking to, it would eradicate this division between them and not them, between I and not I. It's simply, well, if you think about it, from any ordinary view, just for a second, you don't take any deep reflection. If I say that the energy running things right now in life, if this was just an ordinary, if this was a nightclub, and if I was a lecturer on real estate or psychology or something, and this was just a group of people, and if I said, all right, the energy running this whole affair, what's sitting here, what drug you here, and what you paid at the door, and the books you're going to buy later, I'm going to try to get you to buy my all of this, look at you. If you went and you thought, you can look around, and half the time the people who are going, Then you realize, yeah, I am too. The speaker sometimes going, You go, okay, there's something else running it. And I said, all right, the energy running that's running this whole room, my whole lecture here on this real estate thing, all the dreams that's going into it, the same energy is what's running your consciousness sitting there. Then they have to say no. That's not a theory. You can feel it in you. At the ordinary level, your mind says, well, no, it is not the same thing. It's not even worthy of an argument at that level. You cannot reason it into view, into focus. You cannot prove it. You can't try to push somebody into it. They cannot sit there at the ordinary level and go, and I've now told you why. Because the same energy running that out there is the same energy running this, and no matter how hard they go, you can't see it. If you are not separate from it, you cannot see it. There is no trick. There is no drug. There are no sorts of good intentions will make you see it. The diffused consciousness, let me just call it that. That is what's going on in that courtroom. It is not specific. I know, remember, you've got to take this in consideration and then get past it. Comfortably speaking, at any particular moment, half the people, comfortably speaking, are more conscious than they were the second before. If we're snapping snapshots every second, it is simply this matter of, and it can be going on, as you know, between, as I said, a judge and an attorney having a serious leaning across the bench conversation about something. But even while that's going on, they both seem to be more alert than half the people out there going, because they can't hear what's going on. It's like a momentary time out, and probably more than ever, everybody else in the courtroom's gone. But even up there with the two people talking, the judge and this attorney, they go, blah, 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 blah. You know by now that even in the midst of that, The judge is telling him something that's of importance to his case, his clients, and the attorney's going, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. That is the nature of consciousness, and so the point is, even when, comfortably speaking, within that closed environment that I've made up of the courtroom, even though we say that at any given moment, some people are more conscious at the ordinary level, using ordinary terminology, that they're more conscious at this second, in this snapshot, than the other people in the courtroom, and that these people who are more conscious right now are more conscious than they were the snapshot before, when they were going, yeah, 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 yeah. In their little states, well, if you get good, it doesn't take a great deal of energy, besides my exaggeration, well, it's not even exaggeration, but my theatrical of staring like, oh, yeah, yeah. There is kind of a hazy state. It's like the afterglow of the gunfire up in the sky. And then it kind of, your eyes go, there's a kind of state in between. You're going, and somebody's talking, you go, yeah, yeah. And then before you actually go back to staring, it's kind of like you drift back to a stare. You go, yeah, 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 yeah. A person cannot see that state because it is so diffused. It is diffused, comparably speaking, in a way that you can't experience, which is what we're talking about. It is diffused consciousness is within the degrees I point out of staring, daydreaming, and then apparently alert to the environment. Both of those are diffused, though. They are not under a man's control. He cannot determine, he cannot predict when he will go from, after the fact he can. He can say, well, hell, I had to get alert. The judge called my name. Oh, hell yeah. But a man, you cannot predict, well, all right, today I will stare, I will fall off into reveries where my consciousness is just, it's just gone. I will do that. I predict today 420 times. It's a good thing you don't have enough money to, actually wager. You should know yourself, there is absolutely no way to judge that. And I'm not sure I'd encourage you to actually get out and try to count it, because it would probably scare the bejesus out of you. Well, maybe you should. But then it scared the bejesus out of you the first time, and then tomorrow when you realize you're doing it again, then it gives you the severe depressions, the severe discouragements. Diffused consciousness is a fair description of the general state of human consciousness. Now, I'm saying diffused since I'm going to compare it to the whole idea of what this kind of effort's always been about the stage, or what the attempt, rather than try to describe states of being enlightened or awakened or the mind liberated. Let's just discuss the method to it, which is bringing your own consciousness under your own control. And I always hesitate in a sense to use control, because then it makes it sound like, well, we're about to build up to the point that I'll be able to hypnotize people. If I bring my consciousness under control, I'll go up when my client doesn't have a chance, if I'm an attorney, to a judge and go, we plead not guilty, and let him go. It's not that kind of control. It's not control, or you'll be able to fly through the air and pluck gold coins out of a goose's ass. Control means that you have brought this kind of diffused consciousness under your direct. It is now self-centered instead of diffused. That you are now Edgar Winter. You have got to be there in fucking person, or consciousness is not there. The temptations can show up and they're not there, and it doesn't matter. The crowd's still there. The club makes money. They pay them. People buy drinks. They dance all night. Men and women socialize. They pick up one another. The night was a success. The courtroom was a success. The temptations weren't even there. But for Edgar Winter, for them to pull off anything, that poor son of a bitch has got to be there. The only way that you or anybody can be conscious is you have got to be there. But other than that, you can be the temptations. You do not have to be there, and it doesn't matter. The show will go on. It'll come 2 o'clock, and the MC will walk out, or the guy speaking for the temptation say, well, we've truly enjoyed being here in Desden again. We love it. You've been a great crowd. What's for us next time we're here? And they applaud. And the 5 non-temptations go off into the night, and everybody goes home happy. A courtroom, and you think, how could that be? What they thought, what was announced to have taken place tonight, the temptations of fearing tonight in person, did not occur. They weren't here. The people showed up. They did the show. Nobody said a word. Everybody had a good time. Justice. There was an input. People came in. At the end of the night, it was like an output. And you think, this can't be. This cannot be. It's a dream. It's a lie. It's all a facade. Sure. But it didn't make any difference. That's when you're the temptations. Edgar Winter driving by, he thought, well, that's the hell of being a singles act, though. I'll change it a bit for you. A would-be mystic driving by, and he thinks, well, that's the hell of trying to be a mystic. You got the hell to show up in person. And you do. Because if you don't, you'll be the temptations forever, and you're truly not only an oldies act, but it doesn't matter if you show up. It doesn't matter in life. It begins, doing a little quick side trip, is why people can't understand when it becomes personally pertinent to them, many things that they attribute to flaws in communication or breakdowns in the psychology of human relationships, to wit. People can't understand when they think, wait a minute, somebody accused me of something and you got me all wrong. How can they have you all wrong when you're not there anyway? How in the middle of the night of the temptations, they've already put on 2 shows. It's now about 1 o'clock. Getting down to the last show, the crowd's really worked up. The temptations, I mean, they are getting down and doing it. And suddenly, some guy's been there, came in, paid his money, he's been there for 3 hours looking at it, and suddenly he says something like, you guys used to dance better. How can they take that personally when it wasn't him they saw? Of course they will. But you understand now I'm making it fast. I'm back and forth from metaphor to metaphor and reality and life. But it explains, if you begin to see it in a certain way, that people go, how can I be so misunderstood? When you're operating on diffused consciousness, when you are operating internally, because the only way you're misunderstood, we didn't say get hit in the face with a fist. We're talking about something now in the intellectual world of man, the conscious world of man. I've been insulted, or I've been unappreciated, or somebody misunderstood what I said. So, what'd you expect? You're the temptations. What does it matter? What else do you expect if you're not the real act? For people here and there, we change places. Somebody thinks, well, I've been insulted. I've been misunderstood. Then you stare off, and the person that you thought just misunderstood you, they take your staring off as anger when they were just trying to be helpful, and now they look off and think, well, damn, I was misunderstood. Diffused consciousness is the best, or the description I was going to leave you with tonight, is what takes place at the ordinary level of life, of city life. The collective consciousness of man, and again, it's not a theory, take what I've already pointed out, the descriptions, and then do what you're supposed to be doing anyway, is try and get a grip on yourself consciously. And what better description? If you come up with a better one, I'll use it, but diffused. How about ghostly consciousness? Vaporous consciousness. The only time that it seems to actually exist is in its extremes, such as, and then you don't see it, but the closest it seems to exist is in the extremes such as, now at that time you don't realize, but let's say there you sit in the courtroom, and you don't hear it, but they called your case. Judge called it a little louder, and suddenly somebody next to you punched you and said, isn't that you? And you go, oh goddamn, yeah, I'm here. And at that second, it doesn't mean anything to an ordinary person, but you're aware of the fact that, boy, I got to stay on my toes. That you're aware of the fact, well, I was off daydreaming about something. And so after the fact, just for a split second, and it's meaningless, that's the closest. That and the other extreme, if you're hyper excited, like through fear or through the judge hollers, we could do it both right now. This one example, that right then for a momentary you realize, boy, I gotta stay awake. And the judge, once he sees you guys, you're telling you, I'm here. And the judge hollers, listen, if I have to call your name more than once again, I'm gonna hold you in contempt of court. Yeah, oh yes. And you seem consciously really there. Oh yes, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. those extremes. But they're not really, that just seems the closest. You seem to gather to what I said when I tried vaporous with you. The rest of the time, it is just unfocused. That seems the closest. Is when you're focused, is when something, apparently through external, has grabbed your attention. Either that or lack of any external stimuli made you go, oh, yeah, that's me. I'm sorry, yeah. But the rest of the time, unfocused is a fair description. It is uncontrolled. You are the temptations. The world is an oldies act, the conscious world of man, because nobody has to be there. That is the real people. Oh, people are there. At my club, there's 5 guys up on stage in purple suits, ruffled shirts. And so somebody is there, but it's not the temptations. It's not the real people. But you look out at life, and there are people there, but it's not the real people. Because they think they are. If you say, are you the real temptations? And up on stage they know they're not, but somebody goes up on stage and says, are you guys the real temptations? And they ask, what are they going to say? They're going to cry, yeah. No, why not? Somebody goes up to you and says, is that the real you? Is that what you really think? Is that real you? Of course, it's a little bit different actually off stage, because if they make it accusatory, it's even more inclined that you go, yes, it's me. And it's still not you. If it were you, your consciousness would be under your own attention. Perhaps you would like better than control. I may pull this out and use it again of why I hesitate with control, not over a matter of wrestling with linguistics, but the idea of control misleads people. To say, well, my attention, if my consciousness is under my control, if you just say that to people, or if you promise, well, if you follow my course or read my book, it's about how to bring your own consciousness under control. And people go, I like it. I like it. You don't even have to say much more. Maybe that'd help a little bit. Bring your consciousness under your own control. People go, I like it. I like it. And if you said, what do you think it means? Well, I don't know, but I like that. Because it sounds like in some way I'd turn my mind into some kind of even more deadly weapon than it is sometimes now when I'm on drugs or drunk. But actually, they like the idea that it infers. They take it as being the inference that would bring about additional, well, probably no doubt, supernatural powers. Hey, listen, natural powers are staggering enough. Ask Buddha. Ask Confucius. Ask all the people that refuse, when they say, well, tell us about God. Get out of here. Tell us, what is the meaning of infinity? Anyway, you tell me. The energy that runs life is, in a sense, from a human view, is unfocused, which also gives rise, if you'd like to wrap it up with a few little side trips, it's why it gives rise to feelings. There's always a two-pronged approach according to where your mind is at the time. If you're an ordinary person, it gives either feelings of hopelessness, the kinds of feelings that there is no accounting for life. Then on the other hand is the continuing dream that life can be predicted. Oh, I can't do it. I got this 900 number. I can call up a psyche, and that somebody, I'll go see a priest, an oracle, and it can be. No, it can't be. It's just another one of those things everybody knows it can't. It's like everybody knows that a priest doesn't know what's going to happen when you die. Everybody knows that nobody talks to God, even though there is one. They know that this guy doesn't, whoever says he does. And everybody knows you can't predict the future. And yet people will spend money, they'll expend energy. It's because of the fusion of the energy that runs life, it makes it impossible from the level such as where humans live to make any prediction. It is diffused in the full sense of the word. It is not aimed at something. It is the diffusion of consciousness that makes humans stare, and it is the staring. I've tried to slip you up also on this. Many times I've used language as a metaphor, whether you knew it or not, is language is one of the things that gives a sense of sequence, a linearity that seems like things are going somewhere because a sentence goes somewhere. For instance, I can say, all right, Now, everybody wants to know about the future. Now, I don't know what to talk about, but I'm going to tell you one thing about the future. Now, listen. And you're getting prepared. I say because there's just some things you cannot actually predict, and there are a few you are, and I'd never admit it. So now listen. And you're listening, because it sounds like you start off, choo, 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 and the train's going, and it's going to go somewhere. It's not going anywhere. If it's going anywhere, it's going into either greater confusion, it's going into a lie for me. So I'm going to tell you one thing you can count on for sure as far as the future of humanity. Speech. This kind of spasmodic firing of consciousness gives an illusion. It gives a sensation that things are going in some kind of orderly manner, whereas they're not. Whereas I would suggest to you that all the descriptions of the Buddhas and the Jesus and everyone else, a state of this greater consciousness. If there's one thing that everyone, I'll go along with it, I'm not going to argue, just give you a hint, a feeling of timelessness. No judgment, but timelessness is one of the first things you always hear. You know why? Because the illusion of sequential time is gone. You are no longer being driven consciously by this diffusion of energy, which is unpredictable from a human level, which is unfocused, which is non-linear, which is non-sequential. You're simply free from it. You hadn't somebody brought it under control and go, now I got life. Now you got free from life at that level. And then you got nothing to say. You're not caught in that illusion. You're not caught by that energy anymore. But you can't be part of the temptations and do it. There is no four other guys that are going to carry you on stage. You cannot get up there with your sorry ass self and try to do one of those good dance steps when you hadn't been practicing, or when you were clumsy, you didn't press your suit, it doesn't fit, and you think, well, hey, there are 5 of us. I know, there's nearly 6 billion other people. Well, if I just stick with them, maybe, and most of them are smarter than me. The rest, the other 4 temptations will carry me. You know what carrying show business means. If somebody has a bad night or stand in a play, or the band, you have to grab some guy out of the kitchen that says he can play a little bass. Your bass player got in a car wreck on the way over, and you got to go on. And you say, well, at least stand there and hold it, and if you can't play, turn your volume down. We'll try to carry you. Just do the best you can. A man thinks, well, as long as the other 4 temptations are here, they can carry me. There are no other 4 temptations. That was what my good mystical friend Edgar Winter thought. Well, that's the hell about being a singles act. You got to actually show up. Yes. And the only time to show up is right now.